it's time we got started. Thank you, Miss Judy.
Sorry.
That's my cousin. Welcome everyone to the March 2016 meeting of the Pound Historical Society. We're excited about our program today. Excited to see so many people in the audience. We want to say if this is your first time coming to our meetings, don't let it be your last, because we have fun here. You'll learn a lot about the Pound history. We've got people in this room that could share so much history with you if you're interested. We have a special speaker today, and we have some musical entertainment. Over here is Michael Mullins. Michael happens to be my grandson, and I kind of roped him into this. But when our speaker said he needed some help, that's who I called him. Michael is a Pound boy, works at Letcher County Extension Agency. So Michael, thank you, darling.
You're welcome.
And our main speaker is Mr. Richard Crowe. Richard from Hazard, Kentucky.
And I have my grandson with me.
And his grandson, Troy?
Cody.
Cody, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm really bad with names.
And we're Presbyterian, so we feel right at home.
All right. Is everybody ready to hear a love story? And first I'm going to call on Miss Linda Hubbard to bless the meeting, please.
Let's pray. Father, thank you for this opportunity in this place with these people to gather together and learn and form relationships. And I pray this day be to your glory and you be pleased with what you see and hear here. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay. Well, first of all, how many of you are relatives of the Giant or Bad John? Not as many as I thought. The last time I spoke, I was in Winchester, Kentucky, and there were 8. So you got to be careful. Is the fellow I talked to on the telephone the other day here? He told me if I didn't do a good job, he was going to crow me or something. I forget what he said exactly, but do you know who I'm talking about? Sue's son-in-law.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Sue's not here, is she? No, okay. Sue lives out by the gravesite of Bad John. Do you all know where that is, I'm sure?
Mullins.
Yeah, Sue Mullins, yeah.
I know. Me and her's good friends.
Yeah, good. Well, first of all, this fellow's standing here with a camera, and the first thing you should know is he's taping for the Appalachian Regional Commission Television organization. So at some point in time, folks in 13 states may turn on their local TV channels and be able to see you. So what I want to do is to have him pan around and you all say, "Hello, America." Let him know you're here. Hello, America. All right. From Pound to America. All right, good. You didn't know you were going to be on television today, did you? All right. Well, it's a pleasure for me to be here and to get a chance to talk about one of your own. When we talk about the Giant, I've written about him some, and I've got an article here that was in the Kentucky Humanities magazine, and I've got a couple other articles that are waiting to be published. They were going to publish one last month in the Kentucky Monthly, but that fat kid from Harlan that won The Voice got on the cover and stole my space. But more power to him. I didn't say that. More power to him. But one of the things you find out when you work with magazines and publishers is they're about as honest as politicians. So you can't believe what they say. They're going to sell out to the highest price. And I talked to a book publisher Thursday morning at 8, so we're working on some book material too out of all this, and hopefully we'll get it out in And you know, with the websites that you all have, there's what, 1,400 on one, and this new one got a whole bunch already too. So everywhere I turn anymore, I see articles about the Giants or Bad John. But we're going to talk about the Giant today. Maybe we'll come back another time and talk about Bad John. Let's see. We're in Pound, and we're going to be talking about the Giant who was born just across the state line in Letcher County. It was, when he was born, it was Perry County. When he was 5, the counties divided up and became Letcher at that time. And we're going to talk about, do you all know where Martha Jane Potter School is now? That was the family farm. And if you come up from there, I don't know, 8 or 10 miles, there's a 2-story house on the left on 15, and that was John's place. It was a log house at the time. So that was about how close neighbors were in those days, because they were related. The Giant was the uncle, and Bad John was the nephew. He'd married one of the Giant's sisters. I mean, his mother was one of the Giant's sisters. And so if we go back in time, let me mentally take you back in time. Push your time machine button and think about what it was like here in the early 1800s. A lot of space between neighbors. You didn't go to the store to buy your hamburger. You shot it and processed it and did all that yourself. And you raised your own food in the garden. And you had a lot of kids to help with the chores at home. And if you went to school at all, you went somewhere short of 6 months. Some places 3 months, some places 6 months. And the kids would come barefoot and would be local children. And so there wasn't a lot of education. There weren't a lot of churches. The Presbyterians were leaders in getting in here. Social services were non-existent. There might be one lawyer to a town, one doctor to a town, and so forth. Whitesburg at that time was about 75 people. Hazard was about 75 to 100. And so you have a population that gets by hard work and their own ingenuity. If they can't figure it out, they're not going to survive. And there's no law enforcement. So if you can't cooperate and get an agreement with your neighbor, then you're likely going to be in some kind of a feud or shooting match. All right, so this is the situation that we're in. Everywhere you go, you're going to go on foot, or you're going to go on horseback, or you're going to go on a jolt buggy or a sled pulled by a horse. So you're not going to get out much. But there's nothing else around you. It's you and your family. So there's a lot of good things to say about it too. But as far as civilization, wasn't like any other place. So this must be the place that we're talking about. All right. Well, let me talk. I'm going to read a little bit and then talk a little bit. Keep me on track and keep my dementia down that way. All right. So this article was called A Giant Love Story, How the Tallest Couple in the World Met and Married. Martin Van Buren Bates was born in 1837 in the mountains of Letcher County, as far down against Virginia as the map allows. He was the last child born to John Willis and Sarah Waltrip Bates. John stood 6 feet 2 inches, which was tall for his day, and Sarah was 5 feet tall and weighed 150 pounds. So people were a little smaller in those days. And so the Giant's going to come along and he's going to really turn the tables and on all that. So together, John and Sarah worked a good-sized farm that was bordered on the east by the North Fork of the Kentucky River and on the south by Boone Fork, a creek named for Daniel Boone, who had explored there a generation earlier. Martin was born of normal size to parents and siblings of normal size. John Jr. was born first, followed by Margaret in 1815 and Martha. Eliza Agnes came next, then brothers Jesse, James, and Robert. Not Jesse James, but Jesse and James. And Uriah in 1828. Sarah Ann was born in 1830, followed by Henderson, and Mary Jane in 1836. Among the dozen children, several were lean and lanky, but none was considered large. So here we are in this area, this piece of land that you all know where it is. There's a school there now, but before they could plow it, they could raise crops. There were bear and deer and elk running through it that they could shoot. There was fish in the creeks on both sides. And so for a large family, this was a good piece of land. You know, it's sort of a bottom right in through there. Mountains on the sides, and so kind of protected from the outside by the water and by the mountains. And in this environment, here comes this last child. And he's, at birth, he's no different from the rest of them. So they're expecting him to grow up and do chores and, you know, be a contribution that's positive to the family unit. And they're expecting no surprises. Is that, parents, isn't that what you want? No surprises. First thing you do is you count the toes and the fingers, and after that, just no surprises. That's what we want. All right. So across the nation at that time came the Panic of 1837, which lasted for 7 years and featured high inflation, wild land speculation, hundreds of bank closings, and thousands of business failures. The panic resulted from the economic policies of U.S. President Andrew Jackson. His biggest decision was to close the second bank of the United States, which resulted in a disruptive downward spiral in the U.S. economy. His policies were seen as profitable, though, for people living in the West, and the West was Tennessee and Kentucky at that time. So besides farming, John Bates earned money by trading land. You all know that Bad John traded land, lots of it. President Jackson's efforts allowed Bates to borrow money at terms favorable for buying and selling land. Jackson was leaving office, but one of his major supporters would become the new president of the United States. To honor the elfish New York Dutchman, John christened his 12th child Martin Van Buren Bates.
You may think that I'm talking foolish, or that I'm wild, I'm free. You may wonder how I can promise you now this love that I feel for you always will be. You're not just time that I'm killing. I'm no longer one of those guys. As sure as I live, this love that I give is gonna be yours until the day that I die. Oh baby, I'm gonna love you forever, forever and ever, amen. As long as old men sit and talk about the weather, as long as old women sit and talk about old men. If you wonder how long I'll be faithful, I'll be happy to tell you again. I'm gonna love you forever and ever, forever and ever, amen.
All right, let's give him a little round of applause. Put a little music in, try to keep the snoring down out there. All right, for young baby Bates, as he was called, his first 7 years of life were undramatic. Finally, at age 7, the panic ended, but as the national economy improved, Martin's life became more complicated. John Bates, his father, died, leaving Sarah to manage or run the family farm by herself. Also in 1844, the baby began to grow. By the time he was 11, Martin weighed 170 pounds. 2 years later, he was larger than most men, weighing 300 pounds and standing well over 6 feet in height, my size. His glandular condition would rule his life for the next 21 years as he reached the height of 7 feet 9 inches and weighed 478 pounds. Now that's according to the Guinness Book of World Records. Here's his wife over here, and here's the life-size painting of the giant. I had that done without the head so I could stand on a chair behind it and talk, and you'd sort of get the idea of how big he was. But besides being tall, he was 80 inches around the belly. That's a lot of man. And he was solid. There was no fat. He was solid. This is his insole of his shoe. This was one size. His boot, later on when he's with the circus, he would pull out a boot and he'd fill it with a half a bushel of shelled corn, just to give people an idea of, how big his boots were. And here's his hand. This is the foot, here's the hand, and this is his ring size over here, a size 21. So let me pass that around. You can take a look at it if you want to. So he's growing. It's because of glands. I often get asked, how much did he eat? He didn't eat that much. They would have kicked him out of the army if he ate too much, and his wife never complained about how much he ate, and his mother didn't complain about how much he ate. So it was all glandular. Hers was too. But I can promise you this, that after he started growing like that, all the family relatives worried about the growth disease. They thought they might catch it, and they were worried to death about it. They wrote about it, to each other. I hope your baby doesn't get get that growing disease and get started up like that, because, what are you gonna do with somebody that's that tall, that has to bend over to come in your door? And you remember doors were shorter in those days. Of course, he was great to get things off the top shelf, but you kind of worry about providing clothing and food and all that for a fellow that size. So Sarah fretted about his growth and took him to see the only doctor she knew in Whitesburg, the county seat. That was located about 10 miles north of the farm. When they arrived, Martin was wide-eyed. For the first time in his life, he saw a village made up of 2 churches, a courthouse, a jail, and a tavern. There were 3 or 4 stores selling household goods and a couple of mechanic shops where farmers had tools made or repaired. There was also a school, an attorney, and a doctor to serve the 50 or so residents. The doctor knew nothing about giants. He knew of no way to stifle Martin's growth. Martin's height and weight were proportional, and he was as strong as most men. When they returned home, Sarah decided to be proactive of her youngest child. So at age 7, remember this, he's already man size at age 7. So at age 7, he was not allowed to exert himself at work or play. She was afraid he might pop or explode. Your skin gets tight, and you think, well, what's going to happen next? And the doctor didn't know, nobody else knew, so it was a new experience. She remembered what a bright child that he was. He had an almost photographic mind for names, places, and dates, so he became the family tutor. The youngest was soon studying the more advanced text used by the older children in their classes. Over time, he gradually learned all the material studied by his older siblings. And Sarah was happy. She's trying to figure out, after she's gone, what's going to happen to her oldest son, her tallest son, her biggest son. So she was happy that he had this wonderful brain and that he knew how to use it. And so she had heard about a college over the mountains. The Methodists had started, don't boo. The Methodists had started over the mountain called Emory and Henry. Now that's 85 miles as the crow flies. How did he get there? Well, we're not sure. When Jean Ritchie left for college in Williamsburg from Viper, her dad walked her and two sisters across the mountain straight to Williamsburg. And he showed her a couple places that she might be able to stay if she was coming back at Thanksgiving or Christmas and it started to snow. No horse, no car, no taxi. He walked his children over the mountain and left them and said, I'll see you at Thanksgiving or Christmas if you make it home. So they managed to go over there, and she graduated from Cumberland, which was a 2-year school at that time, and then went to the University of Kentucky and was in the first graduating class of social work and became a singer once she got to New York and began strumming her guitar and so forth. So I'm thinking that, Martin was in the same boat. But there wasn't a father. So he probably put a pack on his back and walked over that way unless he caught a ride with somebody going that way. Bonnie, you know Betty Morton. Betty's great-grandfather was the president at Emory and Henry at this time. So it's a small world in that way. So let's say that he walked over there and he was 16. And a year later he comes back, and in those days, if you had a year of high school, you could teach school. But they didn't have anybody to teach high school. So he goes over there, he stays for a year, and he comes back, and he's now qualified to be the teacher. So here he is in a situation at Kona, where they have a one-room school, and the teacher in those days, they started about the end of July, and they went till the snow flew. So if it was really cold, he would have to cut the wood and do all that. He'd have to paint, he would have to keep the varmints out, the ceiling, and he would have to maintain discipline. Well, fortunately, when you're 7 feet tall, maintaining discipline is not a real problem. They would tell stories about kids might fight and would run off, and he would just go out and bellow like he was calling a cow, and the kid would stop and turn around and come right back. He didn't want to get into anything more about that. So he is talking to parents and children of his family and others around them, and he's enjoying the heck out of it. He's finding something that he can do. Sarah is beside herself because she now knows that when she passes on, the others, will farm and so forth, but he can always be a teacher. He'll have something that he can do. So as a parent, she's really tickled to death that there's going to be something positive for him in the future. And he also was teaching all his brothers and sisters, so they were getting a good education too. All right, so Sarah was happy with this arrangement because she worried about Martin's future after she passed on. And he knew his subjects. He found the place that Sarah wanted for him, a place that he fit in and he could be useful to society.
They say time takes its toll on the body. Makes a young girl cry, turn gray. Honey, I don't care. I ain't in love with you, okay? If it all fell out, I love you anyway. They say time can play tricks on a memory, make people forget things they knew.
boot scoot boogie, right, guy? Yeah, he's up here, his toes are jamming, and he's got that dancing shirt on.
Picking a bender, my legs go to jerk.
All right, good, all right. Well, here we are in an ideal situation. The Giants found a calling, Sarah's happy, the kids are getting an education. What could go wrong? In 1860, voters elected a new president. Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky, raised in Indiana, and became a successful attorney in Illinois. He was also a politician, and after representing the Whig Party for 20 years, helped form the new Republican Party. Lincoln was the Republican Party's first nominee and won the national election. It was about as wild an election that year as it is this year. People calling each other's names, changing parties, and all that sort of thing. And in the background is this question of slavery. So Lincoln is elected, and within 6 months, 11 southern states secede. And in April of 1861, they attacked Fort Sumter, Union Depot, and the Charleston Harbor. Sarah's poor farm had no slaves. There were only 17 slaves among the 2,700 or so Letcher County residents in those days. Since her husband had died 2 decades earlier, they no longer swapped land as an income source. The farm produced corn as their staple crop, along with oats, wheat, rye, buckwheat, and potatoes. They also raised hogs and cattle, but they were not rich. So, with no slaves or plantation lifestyle to protect, why did Martin and 4 of his brothers enlist in the Confederacy in 1861? Probably because of a preacher named Ben Cottle. Cottle was a well-known preacher in the area, and by himself he recruited about 1,000 people for the Confederacy. And he became the leader of Cottle's army. And so this Cottle's army became the 5th Kentucky Infantry. The Bates brothers signed on for 1 year, expecting the war to be short-lived, but a year later, Martin left them to re-enlist in the cavalry. And the 5th Kentucky also fell apart at the end of the year because Cottle had been captured and was being held prisoner too. So they had no leadership, and they thought the war would be over in a year, and it wasn't. And they'd been in a few battles, and you know, a few people had been killed and wounded and so forth, so a lot of them went home. Martin decided that rather than walk on his feet, he would rather find a horse to ride, and so he joined the infantry over here in Virginia. He joined French's Battalion of Virginia as a first lieutenant in Company A. He much preferred riding a horse to marching on his feet. At his size, though, finding a horse was always a problem. You know, when your feet are dragging at the knees, and the horse saying, "Hey, brother, give a man a chance." You know, they wore out a lot of horses. And what they would do is, whenever they could find something, you know, as big as a stalking horse or a Clydesdale or something like that, they would steal it or whatever. But there's a lot of farms up in Pennsylvania that lost horses that way. Okay, one Union report said that he was as big as 5 men but fought like 50. He had entered the service as a private and had been promoted as he continued to prove himself. Now he was a lieutenant who could read, write, do arithmetic, and lead others. And you remember, you know, Sarah wouldn't let him do any of those physical things, but he was, by all accounts, very agile. It would have been a great football player, basketball player at that time. But he'd been spared from all that and told not to do that. So now he's in the war, and he's in battle. He rode his horse. He had, you know, the cross bullets here, and his guns, 2 guns at his side, and he's riding. They said at Cumberland Gap, the Union Army was coming in from the north, and the South was coming out of the gap, and it was a foggy morning, and the first thing they saw was Martin on his horse with his guns up, and they were 77 calibers, which means the bullet was about that big. And he's firing and so forth. Well, he was also not big enough to get hit, and he got hit in the shoulder over there, got wounded. But you know, the men would line up behind him. You know, he's kind of a safe haven to have out there with you, you know, and your troops. Okay, so Bates has been promoted, and he's now a lieutenant. And many of the skirmishes and battles that Bates fought in were as part of the command of General John Hunt Morgan from Lexington. While Lee and Grant and others were commanding troops in the thousands who would meet on a battlefield on one side and wear down the other. You know, one side would be killed or one side would, you know, escape. It was a war of attrition. Around here, the men were home guards. And so they didn't have the discipline of the large army. They didn't have the weapons of the large army. You know, around here they were still shooting round pellets, and the Union soldiers they were fighting, you know, had rifles with automatic repeating shells in them. So they were at a big disadvantage that way. Morgan never had more than 2,500 soldiers at any one time, and his job, as he saw it, and they sort of gave him a free hand to do whatever he wanted to until he lost a few times, but his job was to disrupt in Kentucky, to tear up railroads, to bomb tunnels and bridges and so forth. If the Union Army thought they were making an advance, his job was to slow them down or to get them to have to back off and go another way. So in Kentucky, a border state, Kentucky, you could say at one time they were southern, at one time they were northern, at one time they were neutral, and at any one time, they were never anything very long. So the reason was that you had the railroad going through Louisville, and you were exporting a lot of business to the north and making money. And you had a lot of slaves and other crops and so forth, bourbon and so forth, that you were selling down the Mississippi River and to the south. So they were making money in both directions. They didn't want to cut off either side. And so they maintained neutrality. And for a man like John Hunt Morgan, then his goal was to try to drive the Northern Army out of Kentucky so that they would become Southern. That was his whole goal. And they did it by fighting little skirmishes and surprising people and being disruptive. If you ever go to Lexington, in front of the old courthouse, there's a statue of John Hunt Morgan sitting on his horse. And he always used a gilded horse, and this particular horse is not gilded. So one of the things the UK students like to do from time to time is to get a paintbrush and go down and paint that part of the horse that's not supposed to be there. So sometimes the balls are blue and white. So at any rate, that was John Hunt Morgan. And by the way, John Hunt Morgan was a tremendous leader of men until he fell in love. And when he fell in love, he wanted to spend more time with his wife than he did with his men. And so he wasn't as adventurous, he wasn't as heroic and so forth. And so that really began to slow him down in the second part of the war. All right. In 1863, Major French, who had been an attorney in Wise before the war, wanted to set up a recruiting center near Piketon, which is Pikeville these days, to enlist new soldiers so they could become a full regiment. Union officials learned of these efforts and sent Colonel John Dills, commander of the 39th Kentucky Regiment, to run the rebels back into Virginia. Dills' troops consisted mostly of mountain men who knew the countryside up one side and down the other because they'd hunted there and trapped there all the time when they were growing up, when they were civilians. They decided to leave from around Ashland in the middle of the night and arrived before French's men were out of bed. The plan worked so well that after exchanging shots for an hour or so, French ran up a white flag because his men had run out of ammunition. Dills, to his surprise, had captured Major French, 16 officers, 70 enlisted men, and 1 giant. Dills had all Confederate supplies destroyed, then transported the captives to Louisa, then on to Louisville, and finally to Camp Chase near Columbus, Ohio, where they would be held as prisoners of war. He got most of them on horseback, but there was no horse big enough to carry Bates. So he quickly commandeered a flatboat located in the Big Sandy River, and he, Major French, and the giant rowed sitting down while others were using push rods to move the boat up not a very deep river. Dills enjoyed the company of French and Bates so much that upon reaching this destination, he requested a prisoner exchange for both men. They were moved to Camp Chase, but 33 days later, on May the 13th, 1863, both were exchanged. While in Ohio, Bates met another prisoner of war named Colonel Clarence Prentice, the son of George Prentice, publisher of the Louisville Courier. George Prentice had used his considerable influence as publisher of the state's most read newspaper to sway Abraham Lincoln to also exchange his son for another prisoner. Remember, Kentucky's a swing state, and Lincoln has said, the direct quote was, he needed Kentucky to win the war. You know, his wife was from Lexington, and she had 2 brothers that fought for the Confederate side, and he had them in the White House, you know, several times during the war. So when we talk about Kentucky families being split, you know, even in the White House, from the White House on down, we found that to be true. The terms of the exchanges were that each prisoner would be freed, would lay down their arms, and would return to their home to fight no more. There probably was never a more hollow promise made than the one Bates, French, and Prentice made as they all immediately returned to action. French was reassigned to the 63rd Virginia, and Prentice was asked to take up French's old position leading the 65th Virginia, which included Bates. Now, when we talk about Prentice, he liked to drink, he liked to party, he called all his soldiers by their first name. He didn't have a lot of discipline that other soldiers had. But anyway, his father got him out of prison, and he came home with Bates. Prentice and Bates soldiered on together until the end of the war. Bates' release was signed by Prentice, who explained that he could no longer find a suitable mount for the giant. It was then signed by John Hunt Morgan. Bates considered returning to Letcher County after his discharge, but knew that both sides had looted and commandeered the farm's asset for 4 years, and there wasn't much left. He determined that it would be years before the farm would be productive again, and it would be better for him to leave, go somewhere else, than it would be to have a large mouth to feed and not much there.
Oh, darling, I'm gonna love you forever and ever, amen. As long as old men sit and talk about the weather, as long as old women sit and talk about old men, if you wonder how long I'll be faithful, I'll be happy to tell you again. I'm gonna love you forever and ever, forever and ever, amen.
Good, good. Is he always this feisty? Always? All right, that's a good one. Keep him. Hang on to that one there. All right. Prentice, Prentice had another idea. He had seen firsthand how the Yankee troops feared and respected the giant. When they were going up the river, up Big Sandy River, they set him down, they tied him up, they had a rope around his neck, and people with guns aimed at him. Remember, he was as tall as 5 and he fought like 50, so they weren't about to just let him turn on him. There weren't that many of them. So Prentice had observed this, but he'd also observed that once they started talking to him, you know, he taught school, he knew all about history, he knew about the farm, he knew about life outside the farm, he knew all the giant stories and myths and so forth. So it was, you know, they had a lot of conversation. That's one reason the officer for the Yankees, you know, let him go after 33 days. And so Prentice had another idea. He'd seen firsthand how this worked, and he decided that he and Bates could go home together to Louisville, his home, and in the River City, Prentice would promote the giant as a way to make money. In other words, he would go into a bar on 5th Street in Louisville, and he would wager up a bet with somebody that he could have a giant walk in. And then he could have the giant talk, and then he could have the giant do this, and he could have the giant do that. So Prentice was earning a lot of drinking money, and the giant was just doing what he was, you know, what he was told to do. And, you know, this might have gone on for a long time, but Prentice came out of a bar on 5th Street late one night, and he looked this way, and the whole full team of horses and wagon was coming this way and ran over him and killed him. So that ended their profit-making situation in Louisville. The giant didn't know anybody else there, and he decided, though, that people would pay money to see him, talk to him, you know, have that sort of experience. So he decided that he would join the circus, and so the nearest circus at that time was in Cincinnati. So Bates pondered Prentice's death and decided he could improve his life by joining the Wiggins and Benoit Circus in Cincinnati. The circus billed him as the tallest man in the world. They advertised him as being 7'11". Instead of being the target of scorn, the circus represented Bates as a learned man who had taught school and fought in the war. So Bates displayed his pistols that I told you about a minute ago. He had a sword that he showed him that he never used it during the war, but, you know, was a prop for his act. It was 18 inches longer than normal swords issued during the war. And besides the farm, teaching, and the war, Bates talked about various giant myths and tales. He also shared his sizes. He wore a size 20 boot that he filled with half a bushel of corn. His shirts were made by the Catskill Company, and they were 74 inches long, 96.5 inches at the waist, 63 inches at the middle of his back, with a 25-inch neck and an 18-inch wristband. Each shirt took 6 yards of muslin. The muslin was 1 3/4 yard wide and cost $2.50 a yard. He could afford plenty of shirts because the circus paid him $100 a month. His popularity with the audience grew regularly, and that $100 a month was compared to the average wage in that time of $10 or $12 a month during the same time. So long before radio and television and movies, this Kentuckian had become a superstar. As for fame, as his fame grew, so did the interest of other circuses. There were bigger circuses that traveled a wider circuit and so forth. And so 4 years later, Bates moved on to the W.W. Cole's Circus and Menagerie and Museum, where he was promised more travel and greater exposure, and they paid him $400 a month at a time when the average wage was $129 a year. And just as a comparison, Stonewall Jackson was paid $430 a month during the Civil War. So he was earning the wages of a general and everybody else wasn't. Okay? So meanwhile, in Nova Scotia, Canada, a daughter had been born to two average-sized adults in 1846. Anna Haining Swan was born to a former Scotsman named Alexander Swan and Anne Graham Swan of Nova Scotia. Anna was one of a dozen children, all of normal size. She was also a product of glandular growth, and she had been 18 inches long at birth, but by her fourth birthday, she stood 4 foot 6 inches. 2 years later, she stood 5 feet 2 inches, nearly as tall as her mother. And on her 11th birthday, Anna was 6 feet 2 inches and weighed 212 pounds. 4 years later, she was more than 7 feet tall, and by her 17th birthday, she had reached her full height of 7 feet 11. That's 7 feet 11 right there. So she's a little taller than the giant. He made her promise that she would never wear heels. He wanted the vision anyway that he was the boss. He was the taller one. Yeah, he wanted to look up to her. When she was 16, her height had attracted the attention of P.T. Barnum, the famous circus man, who operated a museum in New York City. Barnum offered Anna and her mother $23 a week in gold and covered all her other expenses. When they came, he paid for tutors 3 times a week. They taught her how to play the piano, sing, and so forth. He had a special carriage built that was pulled by 2 white horses, each standing 18 hands high. And of course, when people saw the giant outfit going across town, they would follow it. Many of them would follow it anyway, back to the circus to see what was going on. And P.T. Barnum was glad to sell them a ticket to go in and see Anna. So she is a youngster with her mother in New York City. And because of her height, she's earning a living that her father couldn't possibly earn back in Nova Scotia. And they had their own apartment, which in those days meant that they shared the toilet and the kitchen and so forth with the other acts, but they had their own room to sleep in and for their own possessions. And he would let her go home once or twice a year at his expense also, just anything to keep her happy and keep people coming in. And the place must have been a rat's nest of a kind of a place, a big barn of a kind of a place, because on several occasions it caught fire. And on one occasion it caught fire and nobody could get out the front, and everybody rushed upstairs. They were on the 2nd floor. But when they rushed upstairs, the normal sized people went out the window. But Anna can't get through that door right there. So she was big and didn't have a lot of flexibility and so forth, and they couldn't get her, out the window. So the workmen knocked the wall out, made the window big enough to get her out, and they got a, what do you call those things? Black and tackle. There you go. That's what I was looking for. So they had to, 10 men had to get this block and tackle, get her out the window and get her down to the ground. So she was scared to death. You can imagine. Fire keeps getting closer. Everybody else is out. And they get her out the window. So she decides to go home for an extended stay and calm down and get over it. She comes back and she goes back to work, works for a couple of years, and the place burns again. This time, they couldn't make repairs. This time it burned to the ground, and it's going to be months, maybe a year or longer, before they can get it built back. So here's P.T. Barnum with all these characters. Had the short men, the tall women, the bearded women, had all these strange characters, and they're all on salary. He doesn't want to lose them, so what he does is he farms them out to other circuses. You can go work with this guy, and he'll pay you, and he'll pay me, and so got them all farmed out. And Anna gets farmed out to a situation where she's going to meet the giant. I don't know whether they'd heard of each other before that or not, but they certainly had not met. So after the building caught on fire, Judge H.P. Ingalls owned the contract of Martin Van Buren Bates, and he offered to hire Anna for a proposed tour through the United Kingdom. The two giants would receive top billing. They would travel together, and this would be the big draw, and they would be the Americans in England. The contract was signed in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and their ship, the City of Brussels, set sail. 10 days later, on May the 2nd, 1871, they landed, but something had changed. In this 10-day period, guess what? Yeah, just like him. They got feisty, they got together. Well, they looked at each other and they said, where am I ever going to find anybody else like you? They liked each other. They felt support for each other. And for the first time in their lives, they didn't feel like that they were odder than this person. They were made for each other. So 10 days later, they land in England, and they announce to the world that they're in love. They're going to get married. And the circus owner is like P.T. Barnum. He's figuring out a way to make a dollar off this. So he announces that there can be public exposure, that doctors and reporters can come and ask the giants any questions they want. Sort of like the Super Bowl when they bring all the press in and ask the players different questions to send back to the hometown paper. Well, in this case, the story was these two giants who had met, and now they were going to get married. So one paper reported that half of England was just, it was like watching The Bachelor, I guess. They were just wondering what in the world was it like. And the doctors were having the chance to ask them medical questions. What was this like? What was this like? Did you ever do this and all that? The reporters were writing this stuff down and filling their newspapers with the stories. And one of the people that was really interested in this was Queen Victoria. She invited them to Buckingham Palace on 3 different occasions, as a matter of fact. So the first time they go there, she wants to show them that she really is serious about liking them and so forth. So she gives them gifts. She gives them clocks, watches that are the size of a saucer, and have jewels, diamonds and other jewels inlaid around the clock, and each one had a 6-foot gold chain. So they were going to be together, but she didn't want them to share the same watch, so she gave them both a watch that were valued at $1,000 a piece at that time. She gave Anna her wedding ring, which was a cluster made up of 7 diamonds. Imagine filling a finger that size on that hand that size, what a small solitaire would look like. It would disappear. So she had 7 diamonds made into this wedding ring. And she gave her other gifts and so forth, and she offered to pay for their wedding. So the circus guy is tickled to death because he thought he was going to have to pay for the wedding. He thought he was going to have to give away the bride, but here's the Queen of England offering to provide a church, make the dress, and provide the wedding ring and so forth. And so, do you think the people of England didn't catch on to this? Quotes from the Queen and all that sort of, in all their newspapers. It was a big event. So they chose a church that wasn't a cathedral, and the Queen even went so far as to find a Canadian to do the ceremonies for Anna. The vicar of the church, his job was to assist the pastor from Newfoundland, and so they get married. They go on a short honeymoon, about 4 days as I recall, because they had to get back and do shows, and so the more they spend time together, the more they like each other, the more they're in love, and then they start performing together. And it wasn't like you know, you went in the round of the circus, there was a trapeze person, or they brought in the lion or anything like that. They were in a separate tent, you know, by themselves, and you had to pay to get in the circus, then you had to pay to get in to see them, and they'd have a barker out there, and the barker would, you know, get you to come in and so forth. And Martin would talk to people, and he would tell us stories. He would show us guns and a sword and so forth. And Anna played the piano and sang, and these were, you know, entertaining times for anybody that, you know, visited in their tent. And so now he's making $400 a month, and she's making $400 a month together. You could say that they had arrived. It was a good deal for everybody. I wonder about how they got on a circus train and where they slept and where they sat, and all that sort of thing together. I worry about the practical things. How many times do you have to stop the train so they could go out behind a tree, or, you know? But at any rate, that was a problem. And after they got married, and after they traveled in England for a while, they came back to America, and they found a place near Akron, Ohio, that they liked. It was 130 acres, and they bought it and created the best farm you could possibly have. And on this farm, they had their own house and their own barn built. The house was built, the walls were 14 feet high, the doors were 8.5 feet high, the doorknobs were 5 feet off the floor. All the furniture was special made to their sizes. The bed was a 10-foot bed, and they used to just roar at people coming in and trying to climb up into the chairs, and, you know, instead of everything being out of place and too small for them, now the foot was on the, you know, the shoe was on the other foot, you know. So it was a strange experience. And they were circus folks, so he had a parakeet, a parrot rather, that he trained, that whenever you came up to it and you said something about, you know, Polly want a cracker or whatever, the parrot would say, "Get off my property." And he'd love to see people jump. He had a boa constrictor that just, you know, crawled around in the house and went wherever it wanted to. So you might be sitting there like you are now, and you might feel something run up your leg. I don't know about you, but I'd be wondering, wouldn't bother you. And she had a monkey, and she kept the monkey. You know how some people kept dogs on chains and that sort of thing on a clothesline so it could run and all that sort of thing. Her monkey ran, and so she wanted to have a little freedom, but she didn't have to chase it too far when, you know, when it got away. So here, if you visited him, you went out to this bigger-than-life house, bigger-than-life barn, and, you know, parrots and monkeys and snakes and this large furniture and so forth. So it was a hoot. Now, one of the reasons they settled there was they had friends there, and they liked the land. They bought the best shorthorn cattle and horses, Clydesdales and so forth that they could get. They put a lot of money into this. But by this time they knew that she had tuberculosis. And it wasn't that far, 50 miles to Lake Erie. So they thought that this would be a good place for her. Actually, knowing what we know now, being in Arizona and the High Plains would have been a better choice, but they didn't know as much as we know now. So they're married. They attend the Baptist church there. The church builds a special pew for them in the front, their size. She taught Sunday school and played the piano when she was in town and that sort of thing. And so they fit into the community of Sebring, very nicely. When he went into town was 4 or 5 miles away. Whenever he went into town, he wore his Confederate uniform in a Yankee stronghold. Now this just tells you that it didn't bother him, But he was a crackerjack. He had a big cane, and whenever kids, teenagers, or somebody would give him a hard time, he'd sling that thing at him, knock the fire out of him. He got into an argument one time with a carpenter, and the carpenter took a swing at him, and he grabbed his foot and held his foot up. So the guy's on one foot, and he's swinging him around this way. And finally, the carpenter breaks loose and kicks at him and heads down the road and was never to be seen again. But as he got older, he got a little contrary. He didn't want to. Nobody never picked on him, and they weren't going to start. So he was his own man. Around 1900, and so he came back here, and by this time, the farm had fallen into his hands, and he sold the land that we were talking about earlier to the Potter family. And so the Potters later gave the land for the school, and it was named after one of their daughters who taught there. But yeah, he did come back, and occasionally Robert, his brother from Knott County, would go up and visit him, so they sort of kept up with each other that way. Now, in 1878, the Giants decided to go back on tour because the cost of the farm had exceeded their initial expectations. They signed a 3-year contract with W.W. Cole's New Colossal Shows, which was following the newly laid railroads into the western frontier. This allowed Martin and Anna to see a great deal of America, the unknown parts to most people, and it also gave the people a chance to come. You could imagine being the first train into someplace like Denver or someplace, and people would come together, see the train, but they'd also come together to see the circus, find out what was happening back east and so forth. And so they got in there, and they really found an audience that wanted to know more and more about them and wanted to share their time with them. In 1879, Anna delivered a second child. She had a baby earlier in England, and the baby had died. It was stillborn. And at that time, they made history because she was the first giantess that ever gave birth to a child. So now in 1879, they have a second child. Her son lived only 11 hours despite 2 doctors attending the delivery. And I've got here the doctor's report. Somebody wanted to know if I'd say something about the child. So this is an article written for the Medical Record, a weekly journal of medicine and surgery. And it was published in March the 15th, 1879 in New York. And the title is A Giant Birth. The child weighing 23 pounds and 3/4. And it was written by A.P. Beach, who was the doctor in Seville, Ohio, that was there when the baby was born. He says, at the request of many readers of the medical record, I am persuaded to report a case of labor which I attended a few weeks ago. The great size of the child at birth was the remarkable feature of the case, it being probably the largest human birth on record. It perhaps would be well to state here that when we take into consideration the immense proportions of the parents, the size of the child need not astonish us. The mother was Mrs. Captain M.V. Bates, whose maiden name was Annie Swan of Nova Scotia. She stood 7 feet 9 inches in height. Now here, the Guinness says she was 7'11". Other people have written that she was 8 feet 2. But here's her doctor report saying that she was 7 feet 9. Captain Bates, formerly of Kentucky, is 7 feet 7 inches in height. These large people have undoubtedly, and that's in their bare feet, so you add a couple inches for having shoes on, and then he would be 7'9", she would be 7'11", so depends on who's telling the story, I guess. These large people have undoubtedly been visited by many of the readers of this journal, as they have given public receptions in nearly all of the large cities and towns of Europe and America. At 12 midnight, January the 15th, 1879, I was called upon to attend this lady in confinement, it being her second labor. I found her surrounded with competent attendants and everything in order and at hand that would in any way add to her comfort and convenience. Her pains were quite infrequent and light. After a convenient time with my patient in the usual position, I proceeded to make an examination, but was unable to reach the os uteri, it being so far up. I could not with my hand by any ordinary effort make a satisfactory examination, but concluded that she was in the initial stage of labor. She remained in much the same condition for the next 24 hours, passing the night comfortably, and I saw no necessity for interference with the other order of things. At the end of 36 hours, the pain became more frequent, and on examination I found that the OS dilating and labor progressing favorably. The head engaged position, second occipital anterior, notwithstanding of pelvis. At 4 p.m. on the 18th, while conducting an examination during pain, the membranes gave way spontaneously, and then amniotic fluid came pouring out so profusely as to startle everyone. I had my patient very close to the margin of the bed, as was necessary in order to facilitate manipulation on account of her great size. The bed was well protected with rubber blankets, which carried the waters over the side of the bed, where they were caught in vessels in the amount of 5 gallons. That lost by absorption and executed with succeeding pains would make the total of water not less than 6 gallons. This was undoubtedly a case of dropsy of the amnion coexistent with general dropsy, from which she had suffered to some extent during the last months of pregnancy. Soon after the rupture of the membrane, the fetus head was disengaged and in the soft parts. The mother was in good condition. The fetus seemed strong and healthy, and everything indicated a speedy and successful termination. But here the trouble began. After the escape of the waters, all pain ceased. The great abdominal muscles, which had been so much distended, lay lax over the fetus like the blanket which covered the person of the mother. Inertia was complete. There was no pain except as the result of the manipulation. 10 grains of quinine, squibs ergo, and brandy were administered. Brandy was for the doctor. The forceps were resorted to early, but all to no purpose. The forceps could not successfully be applied. So the baby died, at birth, but 23 pounds, 3/4. That was the second child. So here we have the mother having 2 children, the only births ever recorded by a giant. So she never really recovered after that. It took about 8 years, but her health just kept going downhill from the tuberculosis, and she eventually died. She was about 42, so she was still a young woman. So the giant has to order a casket for her. He writes out the order, sends it to Cleveland, which is about 25, 30 miles away. The carpenter reads the order, and he thinks, this is a mistake. Who would order a casket of this size? So he makes a normal sized casket and sends it to the farm, and the giant just goes, berserk, because now the burial's going to have to wait. So he wasn't so mad that he didn't figure out that this would happen to him someday too, so he went ahead and had his own casket made at the same time and put it up in the rafters of the barn for the eventual day when he would die. So he's doing everything he can to give her a fine send-off. There's 12 pallbearers, and they buried her in the local Mount Hill Cemetery there. And he had an 8-foot statue carved in Europe and mounted it on a 10-foot high pedestal. So when you go to her gravesite today, there's a 18-foot high monument of her likeness there. The one child is born. The other child had been dedicated to science in England, and her sister is buried there. She had come for a visit earlier and passed away while she was there of some unknown disease. So Martin lives on to about the start of World War I. He does remarry, but his life is never the same, without his wife. So at the base of her monument gravesite, he has a Bible verse that says essentially, I rise each day remembering your image, and that's good enough for me. So paraphrasing. So here were 2 exceptionally large people who also had large hearts, great experiences in their lives, and they managed to meet each other and fell in love, got married, had the experience of delivering children. One going to outlive the other, and yet for all the things that they did, all the traveling, they met kings and queens and presidents, and they were known, as the doctor's report said, they were known by people around the world. The happiest times of their lives was when they were together. And so what does that say to us? There's somebody out there for everybody. Find your soulmate. You won't find them until you find them. When you think the battle is over and so forth, that's when they're going to show up. But those of you that live with your soulmate, you're blessed, and with the happiness that these 2 people would feel, and the rest of us would just keep looking, right? Okay, want to take us out?
You may think that I'm talking movie. You were that I'm wild and I'm free. You may wonder how I can promise you now this love that
dance a little.
forever.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Forever and ever, amen. As long as old men sit and talk about the weather, as long as old women sit and talk about old men, if you wonder how long I'll be faithful, I'll be happy to tell you again. I'm gonna love you forever and ever, forever and ever, forever and ever, forever and ever.
Good, that's great.